From killing children to wearing human skin as a mask, some horror movie villains take their job way too seriously, and today we're looking at the scariest ones of them all, starting with Leatherface. If you ask me, he's one of the most iconic horror movie villains of all time, and for a good reason. After all, what's more terrifying than a killer wearing the skin of his victims as a mask? His look alone is enough to send chills down anyone's spine, and it's no surprise that seeing Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre often temporarily paralyzes his victims. But there's more to Leatherface than just his horrifying looks. He's also incredibly dangerous. He's armed with a deadly chainsaw, which he uses to kill anyone who dares cross him. But despite being one of the more violent horror movie villains, Tobe Hooper's script for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre gives a funny explanation for Leatherface killing everyone he came across. Hooper explained it as being a terrible day for Leatherface. He keeps wondering, where the hell are all these kids coming from? And has no choice but to just deal with what's coming his way. Well, at least you can see Leatherface. The same can't be said about this next villain. Yep, I'm talking about the Invisible Man. The Invisible Man has been directed by James Whale and stars Claude Rains in the lead role of Dr. Jack Griffin. This has been considered to be one of the greatest horror movies ever made, and I have to say, it's definitely one of the creepiest movies I have watched. Griffin is a scientist with the ability to turn invisible, but this power has also driven him slowly insane. With his newfound invisibility, Griffin proceeds to wreak havoc in small towns and the people who inhabit them. Whale originally wanted Boris Karloff, who'd starred in his previous film Frankenstein, to take on the role of Griffin. But when a disagreement between Whale and Karloff arose, he was dropped from the project. Whale then approached Colin Clive, another actor from Frankenstein, but he also turned down. Finally, Whale cast Claude Rains as Griffin, and the rest is history. While we're on the topic of making history, can't forget about Jason Voorhees. Voorhees is a horror movie villain for the ages. Sean S. Cunningham's original plan for the Friday the 13th franchise was to introduce Jason Voorhees as a teenage boy, so he cast Ari Lehman in the role of the moss-covered killer. But Cunningham had another option in mind: his own son, Noel. The filmmaker wanted to cast Noel as Jason, but his wife objected to the idea, so Noel never got a chance to be the infamous killer. Noel has since revealed that he wasn't bitter about his mother's decision. On the contrary, he thought it was a good choice and is glad to have stayed away from the lake in New Jersey where they were filming. In its earliest conception, Jason Voorhees was meant to be just a teenage boy, but over time the character evolved into an unstoppable cyborg in Jason X. Through his various iterations, one thing has remained consistent: no matter what form he takes, Jason cannot be killed. But as terrifying as Jason is, there's another villain who will probably never leave my memory, at least. Let's talk about M. Fritz Lang's 1931's M is considered the first of its kind, and it definitely made a lasting impression on audiences with its terrifying story about a serial killer preying on children. Peter Lorre stars as the murderer, Hans Beckert, and the movie follows his story of trying to control the evil inside him: the fire, voices, and torment. Even though it was released at a time when gore and shock value weren't as present in movies like they are today, M influenced horror films for many years to come, bringing psychology into the genre and blending them together seamlessly. But it's not the only one. Remember Pazuzu? The Exorcist is widely regarded as one of cinematic history's most influential horror movies. Directed by the legendary William Friedkin, the film has been a classic since its release over 40 years ago. The story follows a young girl named Regan McNeil who is possessed by an evil entity known as Pazuzu, and whose parents enlist the help of two priests to try to save her. Although initially reluctant, Father Karras and Father Marin soon realize the magnitude of their task. Pazuzu is an ancient and powerful being that isn't easily subdued, and the priests need to use all of their knowledge, faith, and courage to battle the demon within Regan. While the film's immediate sequel failed to replicate its predecessor's success, a third installment directed by author William Peter Blatty captured some of Pazuzu's essence. The story shifts focus and shifts the ultimate villain to the Gemini killer, but it's Pazuzu who's remembered most. Now, one villain that barely had had a role, but pretty much broke everybody's brain around the world, is Jigsaw. John Kramer is an often overlooked villain. Unlike typical antagonists, who are actively trying to cause chaos and destruction, Jigsaw's methods are much more subtle. He sets traps for his victims and then patiently waits for them to take the bait. He doesn't need to lift a finger, but his ideas and plans live on through the many disciples who keep his legacy going. One of Jigsaw's most iconic forms is the infamous pig mask, but he is also known for being associated with Billy the Puppet, both in the movies and beyond. He manages to be intimidating without even having to show himself, because his voice alone carries a certain sense of power and dread. But hey, at least Jigsaw was basically a questionable man in a mask. Chucky, however, I'm still terrified by. And who isn't? Despite being just 29 inches tall, Chucky stands tall among horror villains. He has been terrifying audiences for decades, first appearing in the 1988 horror classic Child's Play. Chucky is a killer doll possessed by an evil spirit. Young Andy Barclay is the only one who knows this, but no one else believes him. This fear of not being trusted adds to the terror and dread that Chucky brings to the screen. And honestly, what could be scarier than having a doll come alive to kill? The original Child's Play ends with a chilling revelation that no one saw coming, as Chucky is burned, shot, and decapitated in Andy's apartment. Yeah, that was harsh. The sequels took the franchise more into a comedic direction, but even though his appearances have changed over time, Chucky has remained just as menacing and popular, just like Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger is a fan-favorite horror villain, and it's easy to see why. Despite the fact that he is a child murderer, Freddy is still a very funny character. This makes him somewhat unique compared to other horror villains like Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, who are typically silent and kinda boring when they're not killing people. Robert Englund's portrayal of Freddy is especially memorable, as he brings the character to life with his own unique sense of humor. Freddy's appearance is just as iconic as his personality, with his signature red and green sweater and glove with bladed fingers. His appearance is so recognizable that there's even a nursery rhyme dedicated to him. Kinda messed up in a way, but hey, at least it works. Maybe not as much as Mike Myers, though. When it comes to horror icons, Michael Myers is the undisputed king. His unblinking mask and methodical stalking are truly iconic in the popular culture of the genre. He's been a staple since he first appeared in John Carpenter's 1978 film Halloween, and he has continued to haunt our nightmares ever since. Michael has a few things that set him apart from other horror icons. For one, he doesn't say anything or display much emotion. He simply does what he does best: hunt and kill. He also has the most iconic mask in horror, a simple white face with empty eyes that gives off an eerie sense of dread. Not to mention, his theme music is just as unforgettable. And that's all for the scariest horror movie villains.